Hi, this is Chad Gordon. The COVID-19 pandemic is bringing new challenges every day to both our professional and personal lives. In this interview with Judd Hoekstra, which was recorded prior to the coronavirus outbreak, we discuss some of the common reactions people have when they're asked to change. And that's something we're all facing today. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Blanchard Leader Chat podcast. Hi, this is Ken Blanchard. We need a new leadership model in business today, one that values both people and results, where leaders see their role as serving instead of being served. In this podcast, my friend and colleague Chad Gordon interviews experts who help us explore different aspects of leadership. I know you'll be encouraged and inspired by what you hear, and you'll walk away with ideas and insights that will help you be the type of leaders others want to follow. Ready to get started? I'll be back at the end of the interview where I'll share what I've learned and how I'll be putting it into action. Now enjoy this installment of the Blanchard Leader Chat podcast.
Welcome to the Blanchard Leader Chat podcast. I'm your host, Chad Gordon. Now, if you're anything like anybody in the business world or in the personal world, change is inevitable. It happens every day. It can sometimes feel like a complete shock to the system. It could be something you want to resist. It could be something that is very difficult to deal with. But since it's inevitable, could we actually plan for it? Could we actually look ahead and be prepared when the inevitability of change happens and occurs? Well, that's the topic today on the Blanchard Leader Chat podcast. And we are joined by Judd Hoekstra, one of the co-authors of the book, Who Killed Change? Solving the Mystery of Leading People Through Change. Judd Hoekstra, welcome to the Blanchard Leader Chat podcast.
Hi, Chad. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's really good to have you here as well. So it's a fun read because it's it's kind of a film noir. It's kind of like a murder mystery, so to speak, and it's a really fun way to look at these business principles. And this particular one is around change. When you look at change, and I mentioned this in the front end, how would somebody be able to prepare for this? Let's really dig into that. How could I get better at dealing with change?
Well, I think the first thing that I would recommend is let's understand what people typically think and feel as they go through change. And let's also understand what we've learned from past changes, both what's worked as well as what often happens more often is what doesn't work. And so, we've really done a lot of research to identify what are those things that cause change to either fail or get derailed, go off the tracks. And so the more that you understand about those things, then the more you can be proactive and plan around them and figure out ways to avoid those pitfalls, if you will, those landmines.
Yeah, and it's an inevitability. I mean, if you are in business today, if you have a job at McDonald's or you have a job at Google, if you're on the front lines, if you're in the white collar offices on the top floor, change is going to happen because every single day organizations they're launching change initiatives, and some are really big and expensive ones. And what the research shows, despite the fact that they want these things to be successful, 50 to 70% of these change efforts fail. And so the value of being able to deal with change better could impact the bottom line in such a profound way.
Exactly, Chad. The interesting thing from my perspective is my colleague and I, Pat Zagarmi, that co-authored our Leading People Through Change program. When we did our research, there was a relatively limited number of predictable reasons why change fails. And when you look at those reasons, that often can be traced back to ineffective leadership. And so if we know what those reasons are, then, like I said, we can develop the skills in the leaders and help them, not avoid we can help them avoid and not repeat the same mistakes they've made in the past. And for new leaders that haven't maybe necessarily tread down that road, you don't have to put your hand on the stove. You can actually learn from what others have already learned.
Okay, so let's look at it from, because there's different ways to look at this. How to be a part of a change effort, so how to lead up and during a change situation. But let's look at it that as if I'm leading a change, or I'm part of a team or an organization that is going to be leading a change effort. What would be, in your experience, and you have a long history of consulting experience dating back to Accenture and Arthur Andersen. What is your experience? What's one of the first steps you need to take if you want to lead a change effort and have it be successful?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to get people involved in the change effort. We know for a fact that too often people are left out of the change process until they're asked to behave differently, and they're not involved in the planning of it. They're not involved in any of the implementation until maybe the very back end. And it's really tough to develop any buy-in or commitment to the change when you're not involved in it. And so as a leader, the first thing you can do is get people involved. And one of the ways that you can get people involved quickly is, let's understand what your questions and concerns are related to the change, so that we can have a dialogue around the change and not just a monologue. And so our research again shows that people go through predictable and sequential stages of concern. They have predictable questions as they're going through the change process. And so by knowing those in advance, we're able to effectively answer those and have a communication, a dialogue, as I mentioned. And so I'll just give you an example. At the beginning of a change effort, people ask questions such as, what is this change? Why is it needed? What's wrong with the way things are now? And then very quickly after they get answers to some of those questions about the change, they begin asking, how's this going to affect me personally? Am I going to win or lose? Am I going to have the skills I need to be able to operate in the new environment that I'm being put into? Where do I go for help if things aren't working out? And so by knowing these questions in advance that people have, you can build a communication plan around that. You can get them involved. You can ask them what additional questions they have that maybe aren't, that don't fall into the 95% of ones that are predictable.
Yeah. So you've covered, I think, one of the topics you've talked about, information concerns and just being proactive with sharing the message, and then also answering those personal concerns. Why do you think, what's your research shown? Why I've been a part of changes, you've been a part of changes where it just happened, and one day you showed up on a Monday, and this is just the way it is, and that the research show that doesn't work really well. Why do you see those things happen? Is that a more of a cultural issue?
I think it's true across cultures. I think that there's many cases where leaders feel like announcing the change and telling people what to do differently is the most expedient way to get the change implemented. And the reality is that, announcing a change and telling people about it and asking them to do something different isn't the same as building buy-in and commitment to that change. So people first need to understand, what's wrong with the way things are now? Why can't we keep doing what we're doing? And then if we're changing, what does the picture of the future look like? What's our vision for this? So that, if you're asking me to leave the comfort of the status quo, where are you asking me to go? What's it going to look like? Is it going to be better than where I am right now? And people need to know where they're headed before they're willing to leave the comfort of the status quo. So I think a lot of it is people think that what's fastest in terms of decision making, which is not usually to involve a lot of people, that faster decision making translates to faster realization of results and action. And it's actually just the opposite. If you leave people out of the process of decision making about how to best implement this change, you don't get their buy-in and commitment. The change stalls, and you end up not realizing the results at all, or in a much longer time frame than what you set out to.
Yeah, it reminds me of that quote: "If you fail to plan, you plan to fail." And so, what I'm hearing from you, and it has a lot to do around a collaborative, an inspirational, inspiring leader, just to rally people behind the message versus, a stagecoach where you just say, "Get on board. This is what we're doing," and start hard driving.
Yeah, there's a quote that I love, which is, people who are left out of change have a really funny way of reminding us how important they are. And what you usually see is you see a great deal of resistance when people are left out of the change process. We know that one of the basic human motivators is autonomy, the ability to either make or influence decisions that affect our lives. And so people want to have a say, even if they're not getting their way all the time, they want to be heard. and the idea of surfacing these questions and concerns and giving people a voice during the change process. And in reality, not only is it smart to get buy-in and commitment, but you're going to end up getting a better solution as well, because the people closest to the front line are the ones that have great ideas about how to make things better.
Yeah. One of your co-authors on this book is Ken Blanchard, and so many great stories and examples. He's just a wealth of those experiences to kind of share those through. But let's get back to the model as you shared before. So if we start with information concerns and letting people know this is what's happening, and we talk about how it's going to affect you. What's the next step? What is that next step of that, as you said, predictable pattern of feelings or situations that happen during a change process?
Yeah, it is those personal concerns. So right after you get enough information about what the change is and why it's needed, people go straight to, how's this going to affect me? And am I going to win or lose? A lot of people will ask, will I still have a job? Am I going to report into the same leader? Am I going to still work with the same set of teammates that I had? And at this point in time, it's pretty interesting. One of the things we know is a common reaction when people go through change is that they feel like they're the only ones going through it, even though everyone around them is going through the same change. So they kind of, hunker down and isolate themselves. And what we're trying to do is create dialogue and build community so that people realize, hey, I'm not the only one going through this, and I can share my questions with others. And oh, by the way, they have those same questions. That makes me feel better. It's so the personal concerns are, we say they're the most overlooked and under-addressed concerns or questions throughout the change process. And if you don't, as a leader, take the time to surface and address those questions and concerns, people are going to get stuck in that stage. And Ken often uses the quote, "What you resist persists," and that's true of personal concerns. So if you're not taking the time to surface those, you're gonna slow down the change process.
And one of my quotes is it's just business. It is personal, because it really is. It's the opposite of what is always the common thought is like, no, it's not personal, it's business. No, it is. This actually is people. It involves people, and if you don't get them involved, there's going to be resistance, and it may not succeed. So you've had such great experience. So we'll break away for just a second from the book, just from your personal experiences. Are there any change processes or any change initiatives that you were brought into an organization? Either you can name them or you could talk to by industry, but where it's either an exemplar, like where they really did it right, and these are the steps they took that you can highlight, or ones that just failed miserably from your long experience in this field?
Yeah, I've got many examples of both successful changes as well as those that weren't successful. And one of the ones that I can highlight is from one of our clients, Barilla America, and they had a great change process. They implemented a new ERP system that changed around not only the technology that they were using and got everybody on a common platform, but also re-engineered their core business processes and had people doing work in new and different ways than they had before. And the process, I can give some examples of some of the things that they did, which was in line with the leading people through change model. But just as an example, as a way to create dialogue, they had these Ask Ed sessions. So Ed was the project leader. He was the sort of the main sponsor of this big change effort that they were going through. And he had once a month, he would have these town halls where people would have an opportunity to get together, and he would give an update as to what had happened over the course of the last month. He would share what's going to be happening over the course of the next month, what was the plan, and then he would celebrate the accomplishments and people that had been part of it. And then he would ask people to share questions that they had that were on their mind. And it was interesting because not a lot of people showed up to one of the first ones that went, and then gradually over the course of time, when they realize, wow, these are really valuable, and we can have a dialogue when we can get our questions answered, and it's a key way of having straight talk, then more and more people showed up, and this ended up becoming a key communication vehicle for them. And Laura Burke is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Barilla America, and she has a number of stories related to this change, and she was a key change leader that led this process. But one of the things that she shared with me, which was just awesome, was that they didn't have a single customer that knew they were even going through this change. It was It was done so well that it was transparent to every, or it was, no one, including their biggest customer, Walmart, even knew that the change was going on and that they revamped all their systems and processes.
And it's and to quote Ken Blanchard again, duh, right? It's just include people, get people involved, and give them a chance to air their questions and involve them into the process. That's such a great example with Barilla, which is obviously one of the world's leading pasta providers out there. What's an example where you kind of shake your head? You may not want to name them, but what's your example where you go, man, that was really poorly thought out, and it just did not hit the mark? And what were the warning signs that you saw along the way?
Yeah, it was interesting. I worked with a pharmaceutical organization that had a new leader coming in, taking over a particular function, and he didn't necessarily respect the existing culture, and he was highly critical of what had happened in the past. Not necessarily a good way to break in and build advocacy, right? But this leader ended up alienating himself, and it wasn't until we started working with him and saying, you'd be really wise to start including some of the people who already are viewed as highly influential within your group here. And even if they don't have a lot of formal leadership experience, people listen to these folks. So the people that are actually even highly resistant to what you're trying to do right now, bring your enemies close, if you will. Bring the resistors in and ask them why they're resistant. Find out what it is that's causing them to see the world differently than how you're seeing it, and why they're concerned that this change isn't going to work, and what they would do to get it back on track. And through the course of doing this, bringing the resistors onto the change leadership team, was able to problem solve. And there's this old saying, those who plan the battle rarely battle the plan. So if you get the people who are most resistant involved in the planning of the change, you end up having them support the change. And people say, it's kind of like the old Life cereal commercials, oh my gosh, Mikey likes it. If Mikey likes it, we'll eat it too. And that's a little bit of what happened in that particular scenario. So it was a good positive turnaround, but it was heading in a downward spiral pretty quickly to start with.
Well, and so there's a couple takeaways there. I like that analogy. I like that story, but change efforts can be salvaged. It's important to have somebody that you can work with that can help you get the plan together. It's best if you could start from the very beginning on the right track, but that was an opportunity where you were able to salvage that. And it is interesting that there's not a listener right now that can't think of somebody in their circle or somebody in their business world that would be the gung-ho, I'm absolutely in, yes, let's do this, I'm motivated. And then on the same breath also go, I know exactly the person that would fight this tooth and nail. And so I find that so interesting that you say, bring them on, find out where the challenges are going to be, and get those resistors to be a part of your implementation plan. That's such a profound idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we know for a fact people are at different levels of readiness for a change as well. So in addition to bringing resistors in early in the process to understand why they have those concerns, and we actually wouldn't even view it as outright resistance. We would view it as they have concerns which are unaddressed, questions which are unaddressed that need to be addressed. And so bring those people in, surface those things quickly. And the other is actually do bring on early adopters as well, people that are gung-ho and excited about the change and willing to pilot it and kind of play in a sandbox a little bit and get dirty and messy and figure out what's working and what isn't working before you roll it out to everybody. And then you've got this mix of great early adopters, as well as people that have kind of put it through the battle, through the fire, if you will, and battle tested it, so that when it does go out to the larger organization, you can have the confidence that it's going to produce the results that you want.
So you said something there that pinged my interest, and probably the audience as well. Like, how do you gauge the readiness? How do you actually find out how ready you are for this change?
Yeah, we actually have a change readiness survey that is a helpful tool in that regard. And then, just from a personal perspective, one of the activities that we do in the Leading People Through Change workshop is we ask people to go through a series of changes to their physical appearance over the course of time. And excuse me, and you can often get some clues as to people that are, they anticipate and like change as part of their personality and disposition versus those that are maybe folding their arms across their chest and a little more on the, I'm going to wait and see how this works out side of things. So I think there are ways to find those who are change ready. And I think even just honestly, identifying who are the influential people that are excited about this is a great way to, identify those early adopters and get them involved in the process early.
Okay, great. This is great advice, and you said there's a lot of resources that we can find online. We'll talk about that towards the end of the recording. What are some of the other stages of concern? What else are we going to be faced with? Again, you've got the research. You know that these things are going to be coming up. What are the things that are going to come up, and how can you prepare for them?
Yeah. Then after information concerns and personal concerns, then the next stage is implementation concerns. And it's really where people want to know the details, the nitty gritty. What do I do first, second, third? Who am I going to be collaborating with? What happens if things don't go as planned? Where's the help desk? Who do I talk to? So it really, this is kind of where you're about ready to, you're building infrastructure, you're about ready to have the change go live, and people are going to have lots of concerns around that. And what's interesting, Chad, is that these first three stages of concern, information, personal, implementation, most of the time, leaders that are leading this change effort, they have already gone through these first three stages themselves because they have access to more information than others. They've figured out how it's going to affect them personally, and they know to a degree what the plan is as far as implementation, at least at a high level. And so their tendency is to actually want to sort of sell the change, to talk about all the impact that it's going to have, because that's where they're at. And they don't realize the rest of the organization is back at needing to just understand what the change is and how it's going to affect them personally and what the plan is well before worrying about what the impact is. And so, the message here is you have to meet people where they're at.
We've just got time for a few more questions. Let's turn the tables. When I initially came in to this discussion, I was talking about somebody leading a change, a manager, a leader of a change committee. Let's be very selfish here. Let's say you are a part of a change thrust upon yourself. I'm a part of a change thrust upon it, as is inevitable. What are some of the traits? What are some of the things that we can do proactively to better deal with change and be more successful to that change, which is, as I said, inevitable?
Yeah, it's a great question. My number one answer is get yourself involved. Don't sit on the sidelines. Change is a participation sport. Identify ways that you can contribute. So ask questions, do it in a tactful way. Say, hey, I'm curious about this. I'm not sure whether you've got the answer to this. Don't assume that your leader or those around you have all the answers, but raise the question and get a dialogue going. So be part of the answer or the solution, not just identifying problems. And so, one of the things that we do is we can ask people, in your own organization, what are the things that are sort of trust boosters when it comes to change, and what are trust busters when it comes to change. And when you boil it down and you look at the lists of those, the answers are pretty obvious. People that are not sharing their questions or concerns with their leader, but being critical, kind of the water cooler talk, and talking with their peers in a way, sabotaging what the message is, spreading rumors. Those are the things that are change busters, if you will. And we definitely want people to be on the change booster. So what can I do to contribute to the positive success of the change? Can I get myself involved in a pilot? Can I ask, could I go benchmark another organization and find out how they did it, so we can, learn from what others have been successful on, or maybe not what they've been successful, but avoid some of the lessons learned that they've had.
What else? What else has your research shown you to be valuable as you look towards the model? Or what are the last few pieces, last few stages? Because we're getting into the implementation, so things are starting to happen. Is there a moment where you can actually course correct?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, as I mentioned, different people are going to be in different stages. So you're going to have the opportunity to influence your peers. And one of the things that our research showed, which is really interesting, I think there's a lot of information about the importance of sponsorship and senior leadership involvement. And there's no doubt that is important. And I would never want to underplay that. but that's actually expected. It's table stakes when it comes to what most employees think. You're going to expect your senior leaders to support a change. You're going to expect them to communicate about it, be involved. But what we really do find more and more is that it's peer-to-peer advocacy that really influences people more than anything. So, in your organization, Chad and Blanchard, you're going to expect your sales leader to be sharing with you information about supporting a change and so on. And, that's important. And what you're going to do is you're going to turn to your colleagues and you have conversations with them, and you're going to take their cue as much as you are your leaders. And you're going to say, gosh, are my colleagues on board? And the more that you are one of those colleagues that's on board and supporting the change and helping others see the value of it and taking actions to get themselves involved, then the more likely it is this is going to change. So the change will go for the better.
So this is, in a nutshell, it's involve the right people, involve people early, communicate, and communicate. So as we're wrapping up here, Judd, what's the thought here? What's the final kind of takeaway that you want people to really get out of this conversation today so that they can be the best leader they can be?
Yeah, I think the reality of any change is that it requires a lot of discretionary effort. It's separate from someone's day job in the vast majority of cases. And so in order to tap into that discretionary effort, you're going to need a village. You're not going to be able to do it with a small leadership team. You're not going to be able to do it with a small number of people, plowing forward with the change and having the vast majority of people uninvolved. You're going to want that discretionary effort. And the only way you're going to get it is to build this village around you. And, we have the saying within Blanchard that it takes a village almost whenever we have any big change that's going on and any big result that happens from that change. And it truly does take a village. So that's what I would like to keep in mind.
We've been talking with Judd Hoekstra, one of the co-authors of the book, Who Killed Change? Solving the Mystery of Leading People Through Change. So Judd, if people wanted to dig deeper into this topic, what do you recommend?
Yeah, I think there's a couple resources. Certainly the book, Who Killed Change. We have a couple chapters in the book, Leading at a Higher Level, which give more details on our Leading People Through Change model and the approach. And we also have an area of our website under the products and services section dedicated to leading people through change, where people can go on the kenblanchard.com website.
All right. Well, some great resources there to check out. And if people wanted to check you out, Judd, where would they find you?
LinkedIn is a great way to reach me. I try to stay in connection with everybody that's sending out individual messages. So that's the best place to reach me.
All right. Judd Hoekstra, thank you so much for being a part of this episode of the Blanchard Leader Chat podcast. Thank you, Judd.
Thank you, Chad. Much appreciated.
And thank you for joining us for today's podcast. If you enjoyed this interview and like to learn more and also help us grow the audience, please subscribe to the Leader Chat podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, or wherever you're listening. And please share this with your friends. The best way you can help us grow, though, is feedback. As Ken Blanchard says, feedback is the breakfast of champions. So please write us a review if you haven't already. And by the way, this podcast is sponsored by the Ken Blanchard Companies. If you'd like to learn more, there's even a lot of free resources to better yourself and your organization. Go to kenblanchard.com. You'll find all kinds of free tools and materials to help you and others grow. Thanks again to our guest for joining us today. For now, I have the pleasure of turning it over to Ken Blanchard for his thoughts on what we discussed. Here it is, your final minute with Ken Blanchard.
Chad, I really enjoyed your interview with Judd Hoekstra. Judd is one of my favorite people. Not only did he go to Cornell, but he's been a major player in our Blanchard company for many, many years. And he really understands the importance of change. And he realizes that the reason why change doesn't work is people start thinking that announcing the change is the important thing, and it's the same as implementing it. No, what you got to do if you're going to implement and be successful as change, as Judd indicated, you got to involve people. We got to remember our thing that we've talked about many, many times is that none of us is as smart as all of us. And boy, does that go with implementing change. Because the way it gets bogged down is that we don't involve people and then may become resistors of the change because they aren't heard and all. And what you want to really do is to get as many people involved as you can so that the change becomes their change and not your change. So powerful, powerful stuff. This is the kind of thing that you need to share with all your leaders, because it's the leaders that goof up change because they get their ego in the way and they think that they can just point the direction and everybody's going to follow. It doesn't happen. Change is a collaborative process. Remember that. God bless.